They didn't scream. They didn't beg. They didn't even glare back. The humans just kept standing up again, quiet, bruised, and unbroken, until the entire combat hall started feeling like it was holding its breath. Because in a place where everyone worshipped force, the most dangerous thing was a species that refused to react the way predators expected. Arclight Station hung above a dead moon like a blade held perfectly still. Inside it sat the Coalition's most respected war college, the Meridian Combat Institute. Species from dozens of worlds came here to earn the right to command fleets, lead boarding squads, or advise the Council itself. And every cycle, Meridian had an unspoken rule: the newest recruits got tested by pain. Not officially. Not on paper. But everyone knew. The instructors called it pressure conditioning. The dominant species called it sorting. The smaller species called it surviving. This cycle, humans arrived. They were not the biggest. Not the fastest. Not the loudest. But they had eyes that kept measuring everything, even when their faces stayed calm. Cadet Juno Vale was one of them, lean, sharp-featured, hair cut close, uniform always clean even when her knuckles weren't. She spoke little in the barracks, listened a lot, and ran drills like she was building something invisible, piece by piece. That made her a target. The bully crew belonged to the Grenth, towering, plated, heavy-limbed fighters whose culture treated dominance like oxygen. Their leader, Krazek, had a scar across his mouth that pulled every grin into a threat. He challenged Juno during open-floor sparring, the kind that was technically voluntary unless you wanted to be labeled coward. Juno accepted. The match lasted 30 seconds. Krazek didn't aim to win. He aimed to break her rhythm, her posture, her pride. He slammed her down, dragged her back up, and slammed her again, making sure the impact echoed so the whole hall could hear it. The instructors watched from the platform above. They did not stop it. Juno spat blood onto the mat, pushed herself up, and bowed, proper, controlled, polite. Krazek blinked, as if confused. He wanted fear. He wanted rage. He got calm. So he hit her again. After that, the pattern became a schedule. A shoulder check by accident in the corridor. A malfunctioning gravity plate on the obstacle run. A 5-on-1 lesson during team drills where the humans were always assigned the weakest partners and the worst gear. And each time, the humans did something that made the other species uneasy. They endured without performing helplessness. They helped each other quietly. Bandages shared. Boots swapped. Notes passed. When Juno limped, another human slowed down beside her without speaking. When a human collapsed in the shower room, 2 others carried him out like it was routine, like this had been rehearsed. The smaller species noticed. A thin-skinned avian recruit named Sarah Tell began hovering near the humans at meal times. A nervous aquatic trainee called Mivran sat close enough to listen. Even a couple of insectoid cadets started watching the humans with new attention, as if trying to understand their strange silence. The Grenth noticed too. Krazek hated attention that wasn't his. One afternoon, weapons calibration turned into a public spectacle. Juno was assigned a pulse spear, Meridian standard for close-range engagements. It was balanced for Grenth arms, not human hands. Still, she adjusted her stance and began the drill: thrust, pivot, parry, reset. Krazek and his crew surrounded her station in a slow circle, boots clicking like a countdown. "You're improving," Krazek said, voice thick with amusement. "That means you need a harder test." Juno didn't look up. "My scores meet the standard." Krazek leaned close. "Standards are written by the strong." He slapped the spear's shaft, knocking it sideways. Juno tightened her grip, corrected, continued. Krazek slapped it again, harder. Juno's hands slipped. The spear clattered against the floor. The hall went quiet. Not because anyone cared about a dropped weapon. Quiet because everyone knew what came next. Krazek grabbed Juno by the collar seam and yanked her forward. The fabric stretched. Her boots skidded. The breath left her lungs in one sharp burst. The instructors watched. Juno's eyes flicked toward the observation platform, just once. Not pleading. Not accusing. Measuring. Then she did something that made Krazek's crew laugh. She loosened her stance. As if she chose to fall instead of fighting the pull. Krazek dragged her down, slammed her into the mat, and pressed a knee into her ribs. "You're too soft for this place," he hissed. "Say it." Juno breathed through pain that would have made other recruits cry out. Her lips parted. But she didn't say what he wanted. She said, quietly, "You're relying on a script." Krazek froze for half a heartbeat, then fury flooded his posture. He raised his fist. A few recruits flinched. A few looked away. The humans did not move. But every one of them had stopped breathing at the same time, like a pack pausing before a coordinated strike. Then the main doors opened. A clean hiss of pressure seals. A soft, controlled step across metal flooring. A woman entered. She wasn't tall compared to a Grenth, but she walked like she owned gravity. Her uniform wasn't the Institute grey, hers was coalition black, trimmed with a small emblem of the Council's security branch. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was calm. Her eyes were focused, like a blade edge. Commander Naira Cade. Meridian's instructors stiffened the moment they saw her insignia. A council enforcer didn't visit a war college for polite conversation. Naira looked once at the platform, then at the trainees, then at Krazek. Her gaze landed on his raised fist. She didn't shout. Didn't threaten. She simply said, "Unhand the cadet." Krazek's chest expanded, ready to roar out dominance. But when his eyes met hers, his confidence flickered. It was subtle, just enough for everyone to notice. Naira's expression didn't change. She stepped closer, boots quiet, voice level. "You're using training rules to commit assault." Krazek bared his teeth. "This is Meridian tradition." Naira tilted her head a fraction, as if studying a faulty machine. "Then Meridian has been teaching cowardice." Silence hit the hall like a shockwave. Naira turned to Juno, still pinned. "Cadet, can you stand?" Juno inhaled. Her ribs protested. She nodded once. Naira's eyes shifted to Krazek again. "Release her." Krazek's knee lifted, slowly, like he wasn't sure his own body still belonged to him. Juno rolled to her side, rose to one knee, then stood. Her hands shook, but her chin stayed level. Naira took one more step forward, now close enough that even a Grenth could feel her presence like heat. "Meridian is about to learn something," she said softly. Krazek tried to laugh. It came out rough. "And what's that?" Naira's gaze swept the humans, every bruised face, every quiet posture, every watchful eye. Then she looked back at Krazek. "That you've been hitting people who were studying you." And in that moment, the bullies stopped smiling. Naira didn't ask the instructors for permission. She didn't need it. She climbed the platform steps with measured pace, the kind of pace that forced everyone to wait for her words. The senior instructor, a stone-faced Vishari named Tutor Prime Olin, rose from his seat like a statue coming alive. "Commander Cade," Olin said, carefully polite. "This is a training environment." Naira glanced at him. "Then train your people not to hide behind loopholes." Olin's jaw tightened. He gestured toward the floor below. "Challenges are permitted." Naira's eyes didn't blink. "Beatings are not." A murmur ran through the hall, small species whispering, dominant species bristling, everyone realizing the rules might suddenly matter. Naira pointed down at Krazek. "You, Grenth. What's your name?" "Krazek of Iron Hearth," he snapped, recovering enough to posture. Naira nodded once, like she was labeling a file. "Krazek of Iron Hearth. You and your pack have been selecting targets who can't fight back under your rules." Krazek spread his arms. "They can quit." Naira's voice sharpened just a touch. "So could the weak species you used to raid. That didn't make you honorable." That hit harder than any fist. Even some Grenth trainees shifted uncomfortably. Naira continued, "Meridian's purpose is leadership under pressure. If your pressure is just cruelty, you're not creating leaders. You're creating predators who panic when the prey stops behaving." She turned to the humans. "Form up." 6 humans stepped forward without hesitation. Not fast. Not aggressive. Coordinated. Juno stood among them, breathing shallow, eyes steady. Naira pointed at the weapons rack. Cadet Vale. Pick a weapon. Juno's gaze flicked over choices built for alien grips, heavy pulse hammers, hooked blades, segmented staves. She walked to a simple training baton, light, balanced, plain. Krasek laughed. A stick. Juno didn't answer. Naira looked at Olan. I request a formal demonstration. Olan's eyes narrowed. Of what? Naira spoke clearly so the whole hall could hear. Of what humans do when the rules become real.
Olan hesitated.
The council enforcer's presence was a chain around his decision-making. Finally, he nodded once. Accepted. Parameters. Naira held up 2 fingers. 2 conditions. First, no pack attacks. One-on-one. Second, this ends when a combatant yields, not when someone can't stand. Krasek scoffed. Afraid your cadet breaks. Naira's gaze didn't flinch. I'm afraid you'll reveal yourself. Krasek stepped forward, shoulders wide, claws flexing. Fine. Naira pointed down to the sparring circle. You and Juno. A ripple of shock moved through the hall. Juno's ribs were damaged. Everyone could see the way her breathing stayed shallow. This wasn't fair. Naira didn't seem interested in fair. She was interested in truth. Juno entered the circle and raised the baton in a basic guard stance meridian taught to every species. Not perfect for humans. Not perfect for her injuries. But disciplined. Krasek lifted a heavier weapon, an edge bar, thick and brutal. He twirled it for intimidation. The signal sounded. Krasek charged. He swung high, aiming to crush Juno's guard with raw force. Juno didn't block. She stepped inside the swing's arc, so close the edge bar couldn't finish its path. Then she tapped his wrist, light, precise, exactly where tendons controlled his grip. Krasek's weapon dipped. His surprise flashed. Juno's baton snapped up, not to his head, but to the side of his neck plating where sensors fed balance data to his inner ear. A training strike, not lethal, but perfectly placed. Krasek stumbled. The hall gasped. Krasek roared and swung again, wide and furious. Juno stepped back, but not far, just enough to make him overreach. Her baton cracked against his knee joint, then slid to his ankle, then his elbow. It looked like nothing. It sounded like small impacts. But Krasek's movements began to degrade. Not from pain alone, from disrupted mechanics. From a system being sabotaged. He tried to grab her. Juno let him. The moment his clawed hand closed, she rotated her wrist, slid her baton under his forearm, and used his own forward mass to tilt him off balance. Then she moved. A quick pivot. A low step. Krasek slammed to the mat, hard enough to rattle the circle's boundary plates. Silence struck again. Krasek pushed up, shaking. His pride burned hotter than his body. He lunged, this time with a backhand meant to end it. Juno's eyes tracked the motion like she'd already seen it 100 times. She ducked under, stepped behind him, and placed the baton against the back of his skull plating, gentle, controlled. 1 more inch of force would have rattled his brain in its casing. She didn't push. She simply said, yield. Krasek froze. His breath came harsh. Everyone waited for him to explode. Naira's voice floated down from the platform, calm as a verdict. Krasek. If you continue, you'll be continuing under council oversight. That wasn't a threat. That was a promise with paperwork behind it. Krasek's shoulders sagged by a fraction. He snarled, this proves nothing. She got lucky. Naira nodded. Then we do it again. Krasek's eyes widened. What? Naira raised her hand and pointed across the hall to his crew. Your best fighter next. The Grenth pack stiffened. Their confidence had always been built on group violence. Not controlled exposure. A second Grenth stepped forward, bigger than Krasek, with reinforced arm plating. Naira spoke to the humans without looking at them. Switch. Another human entered the circle, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes and taped knuckles. He held no weapon at all. The Grenth trainee grinned. Unarmed. The human tilted his head slightly. Less to take from me. The signal sounded. The Grenth rushed. The human moved like a door closing, simple, direct, unstoppable. He sidestepped, hooked the alien's wrist, and used leverage rather than strength. The Grenth slammed forward into empty space, and the human's elbow met a pressure point beneath the collar plating. The big alien staggered. The human stepped in, swept a leg, and dropped him. Still not flashy. Still not violent for show. But it was effective. Naira's gaze moved across the watching recruits. Humans fight differently, she said. Not because they're superior in muscle. Because they're obsessed with problem-solving. Olan's voice came tight. This is a demonstration, not a doctrine. Naira turned slightly. Then watched the doctrine form. Down below, the humans didn't celebrate. No cheers. No arrogance. They simply helped Juno back to the edge of the circle and checked her ribs like a practiced medical drill. That quiet teamwork unsettled the predators more than the takedowns. Because it wasn't revenge. It was preparation. Naira looked at the instructors again. You let them get hurt in silence, she said. Now you're going to learn what their silence was for. And in the back rows, the smaller species began to stand straighter, like hope had finally been given permission to exist. That night, Meridian's barracks felt different. The Grenth pack stayed clustered together, speaking in harsh whispers. They weren't laughing now. They were debating. The smaller species moved closer to the humans like gravity had shifted. Juno sat on the lower bunk of her unit room, breathing carefully. Another human, Cadet Elias Crow, wrapped her ribs with practiced hands. A third, Cadet Mina Rourke, laid out a small kit of tools on a towel like a surgeon preparing for work. Juno watched Mina. What's that? Mina's eyes stayed calm. A solution. They weren't planning revenge in the way aliens expected. No poison, no ambush, no pack battle in a dark corridor. They were planning something more dangerous. They were going to change the environment. Elias finished the wrap and nodded once. Payne's information, he said. We learned enough. Juno leaned back against the wall. We did. Because every assault had been a lesson. Every shove had shown where cameras didn't reach. Every accident had revealed which instructors pretended not to see. Every pack attack had exposed who enjoyed watching. Humans had recorded it all, quietly. Not with hidden drones. Meridian scanned for those. With memory. With patterns. With small details written down in plain notebooks that nobody bothered to confiscate because nobody respected paper. Naira entered their room without knocking. She didn't need to. Her role gave her access. She looked at Juno's bruises and didn't soften her face. Softness could be mistaken for pity. Instead, she asked, "Are you functional?" Juno met her eyes. Yes, Naira nodded once. Good. Tomorrow, there's a command simulation. Elias frowned. We'll be assigned last again. Naira's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Not if the assignment system breaks. Mina lifted her gaze. It can. Naira stepped closer. Everything can. She set a small device on the bunk, Meridian issued. Standard. Boring. Then she tapped it, and the display showed the command simulation rules in coalition legal format. Naira spoke like she was laying bricks in a wall. Meridian has a policy for equitable team distribution. It exists to satisfy council audits. The instructors haven't used it in years. Juno's eyes sharpened. But it's still active. Naira nodded. If invoked. Elias exhaled slowly. You're saying we can force a fair draw. Naira's gaze swept them. I'm saying humans win wars with paperwork as often as with bullets. Outside the room, footsteps approached, light, hesitant. Saratel, the avian trainee, stood at the doorway with feathers slightly puffed in nerves. Behind her hovered Mivran, the aquatic recruit, limbs trembling. Saratel spoke carefully. "We heard you stopped Krazek." Mina didn't posture. "We didn't stop him. We made him visible." Mivran swallowed. "What happens now?" Naira looked at them. "Now you decide whether you're recruits, or a future." Juno held Saratel's gaze. "They've been doing this to you longer than us." Saratel's throat worked. "Yes." Elias asked, "Do you want it to end?" Saratel nodded once, a small motion that carried years of fear. "Yes." Juno pointed at the towel of tools. "Then sit. We're going to build something." They didn't build a weapon. They built a tactic. The next day, the command simulation began in the holographic war hall, a giant, rotating battlefield with terrain, fleet markers, supply lines, and fog-of-war algorithms. Teams were assigned commanders, then forced to adapt to shifting scenarios. As predicted, the instructors tried to stack the humans again, placing them in the least equipped squad, pairing them with nervous species, assigning them a commander role that was more liability than power. Naira stepped forward before the teams were finalized. She raised her device. "I invoke Coalition Training Policy 14.3, Equitable Distribution." The hall froze. Tutor Prime Olan's face tightened. "That policy is outdated." Naira's voice stayed smooth. "Then update it. Until then, it applies." Silence. Then Olan, trapped by his own bureaucracy, nodded stiffly. "Accepted." The team assignments shuffled. Krazek's eyes widened when he saw the result. Humans were no longer isolated. Juno's squad now included Saratel, Mivran, 2 insectoid cadets, and, most importantly, a tall, calculating Dravik firebreather named Vorntal, who had been silent for weeks, watching everything. Vorntal looked at Juno like she was a strange equation. "You forced the instructors." Juno nodded. "We used the rules they forgot." Vorntal's mouth curled slightly. "Interesting." Across the hall, Krazek's pack had been split. Not dismantled, but disrupted. Predators hated disruption. The simulation began. The scenario: a coalition outpost under siege by unknown raiders. Limited ships. Limited supplies. A ticking timer. Most squads did what they were trained to do: rush, clash, dominate. Juno's squad did something else. They listened. They mapped. They asked questions the simulation didn't expect. Why were the raiders attacking? What supply routes did they need? Which terrain forced them into predictable lanes? Where would an aggressive commander overcommit? Mina's fingers moved over the holo interface, marking probabilities. Elias watched enemy movement like it was a story with chapters. Saratel offered aerial terrain knowledge. Mivran calculated underwater route options on a planet map most species ignored. Then Juno did the most human thing imaginable. She changed the win condition without breaking a rule. Instead of defeating the raiders, she targeted their fuel logistics. She redirected drones to jam resupply beacons. She used decoy signals to lure raiders into empty valleys where their ships ran out of power. A fight without fighting. The enemy's aggression became their cage. Their squad held the outpost with minimal casualties. When the simulation ended, the scoreboard flashed. Juno's squad: highest survival rate, lowest resource cost, fastest stabilization time. The war hall went silent again. Olan stared at the numbers like they offended him. "That is unconventional." Naira spoke from the back, voice calm. "It's called strategy." Krazek's fists clenched. His world was built on dominance. Humans had just beaten him without granting him the pleasure of a real brawl. That night, Krazek made a decision. He wouldn't try to win through the rules anymore. He would try to end the humans. And he would do it the oldest way predators knew. In the dark, where witnesses were optional. The corridor lights in Meridian dimmed at shift change, enough to rest eyes, not enough to hide blood. But predators didn't need darkness to hunt. They only needed a moment where nobody wanted to see. Juno walked back from the medical bay with Mina on one side and Saratel on the other. Elias trailed behind. It looked casual. It wasn't. They had changed their formations. They moved like a unit now. Halfway down the corridor, a maintenance hatch opened with a soft click. Grenth's arms shot out. Krasek's crew tried to pull Juno inside. Mina reacted first, not with screams, not with panic. She flicked something small underhand, and it bounced once on the floor. A burst of bright mist exploded, harmless, training safe, but thick enough to light up every motion. A visibility trap. Cameras didn't see well in dimness. But they saw perfectly when the corridor became a glowing fog of motion. Krasek froze as the mist stuck to his plating, outlining his claws like paint. Elias stepped forward, voice firm. Step back. Krasek snarled. You think tricks save you? Juno's eyes stayed steady. It's not a trick. It's evidence. The corridor speakers crackled. Naira's voice came through, calm as a closing door. Stand down, Krasek of Ironhearth. The Grenth's head snapped up. What? Floor panels clicked. Security locks engaged. The hatch sealed behind his crew with a hard metallic thud, trapping them in plain view. Naira stepped into the corridor from the far end, flanked by 2 Institute guards who looked suddenly nervous about who they were escorting. She held up a data slate. Attempted assault. Recorded. Multiple angles. Krasek's chest heaved. They set me up. Naira nodded once. Yes. That single word made the corridor feel colder. Naira walked closer, her boots tapping a steady rhythm. You've been using Meridian's culture to hurt people. Humans used Meridian's culture to reveal you. Krasek's claws twitched, but he didn't strike. Not now. Not with the cameras bright and the locks engaged. Naira turned to the guards. Take them. The guards hesitated. Tutor Prime Olin's authority had always felt absolute here. But council authority was heavier. They moved. Krasek's crew protested. Krasek didn't. He simply stared at Juno with a hatred so intense it felt like heat. As he was dragged away, he hissed, "This isn't over." Juno's voice stayed low. It never was. The next morning, the Institute tried to pretend it was a disciplinary issue. A private matter. Naira refused that. She demanded a public tribunal inside the war hall, with trainees as witnesses. Tutor Prime Olin fought it, but policy trapped him again. Meridian depended on council funding. And the council didn't like scandals that could spill into news feeds. The tribunal began. Naira presented footage. Injury logs. Pattern reports. Time stamps. Juno and the humans testified without dramatics, just facts, delivered like a measured pulse. Then Saratel stepped forward. Then Mivran. Then Vaughn Tal, the Dravik, spoke with quiet fury about traditions that were really just predation dressed in uniforms. One by one, the smaller species admitted what they had endured for cycles. Meridian's silence shattered. And when silence breaks, it's loud. The council ruled quickly. Krasek and his crew were removed from the institute and placed under coalition review. Several instructors were censured. Tutor Prime Olin was forced to accept new oversight. Meridian's dominant trainees seethed. Some were embarrassed. Some were angry. A few, quiet ones, looked relieved, as if they'd been waiting for someone to finally draw a line. But the biggest test still remained. The Grand War Game. Meridian's final simulation, where squads competed in a full-scale multi-day scenario to earn command ranking. The winners graduated into coalition leadership roles. Historically, dominant species won. They controlled resources. They bullied alliances into submission. This time, the humans didn't aim to win by dominating. They aimed to win by uniting. Juno's squad grew. Not as a formal team, Meridian wouldn't allow coalitions within coalitions. But as a network. Quiet conversations. Shared plans. Mutual defense agreements written into the simulation's legal loopholes. When the war game began, Chaos exploded across the holo battlefield. Krasek was gone, but his ideology remained. Several dominant squads tried to crush smaller squads early, the old pattern repeating. Juno's network activated. Instead of meeting force with force, they redirected it. They turned bullies into predictable threats, then guided those threats into traps that cost the aggressors fuel, time, and morale. They used terrain in creative ways, false retreat routes, decoy supply caches, drone swarms that served as moving shields. They rescued squads that should have been sacrificed. And then something happened Meridian had never seen. Smaller species started fighting back confidently, not with rage, but with planning. Because humans had done something no instructor had taught them. They had taught them how to think like engineers, not victims. In the final phase, two dominant squads formed a temporary alliance to crush Juno's position at the outpost. Juno let them come. She allowed them to believe she was cornered. Then, at the last moment, she triggered a legal clause in the wargame scenario. Emergency evacuation authority for civilians. She had spent days quietly relocating simulated civilians into the outpost's underground zones. Now, by attacking her position, the dominant squads were flagged by the system as committing a war crime. The scoreboard lit up. Penalty points flooded their totals. Their alliance collapsed into chaos. Juno's squad didn't fire a shot. They just let the enemy's aggression convict itself. When the wargame ended, Juno's network stood at the top. Naira watched from the platform, expression calm, but her eyes bright. Meridian had been built on the belief that fear created strength. Humans had proven something different. Curiosity creates strength. And unity turns strength into victory. Meridian didn't become gentle overnight. But it became honest. That was more dangerous to old traditions than any rebellion. After the wargame, the Institute held a graduation assembly in the central dome, a wide chamber of glass and steel where the dead moon's pale light spilled across polished floors. Species stood in layered rows, uniforms crisp, eyes scanning for signs of who would lead the coalition next. Juno stood with her squad and the wider network that had formed around them. Her ribs still ached, but the pain felt like a memory with purpose now, not a leash. Naira stood at the front with council officials. Tutor Prime Olin stood beside them, rigid, restrained, no longer the unquestioned ruler of this place. The council speaker began with formal words: honor, duty, service. Then Naira took the podium. She didn't speak like a politician. She spoke like someone who had survived long enough to hate lies. Meridian once believed that cruelty was the same as pressure, she said. It isn't. The chamber stilled. Naira continued, pressure is a storm. Cruelty is a choice. Her gaze moved across the trainees, dominant species, smaller species, watchers, participants, the ones who had pretended not to see. The humans didn't win because they were stronger, Naira said. They won because they refused to let the system decide what kind of people they would become. She paused, then added, they endured without losing their minds. They fought without becoming monsters. They used rules, not to hide, but to expose. Juno's hands tightened at her sides. Naira looked directly at her. Cadet Juno Vale. Juno stepped forward. Naira didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her respect was heavier than warmth. You were hurt, Naira said. You were tested. And you showed a truth that changed this institute. Juno swallowed. The room's attention felt like gravity. But she held it. Naira asked, why didn't you strike back the first time? Juno's answer came steady. Because they wanted me to become what they were. If I did that, they'd win twice. Silence stretched, then shifted. Not into applause yet. Into something deeper. Recognition. Naira nodded once. Exactly. The council awarded commendations to Juno's network, humans and non-humans alike. The smaller species stood straighter as their names were spoken out loud in a hall that had ignored them for cycles. And then Tutor Prime Olin was forced to speak. He stepped forward like a machine running a program it hated. The Meridian Combat Institute, he said stiffly, will implement revised oversight and enforce anti-assault conduct policies. It was bureaucratic, ugly, reluctant. But it was change. Later, in the barracks, the mood was strange, quiet joy mixed with exhaustion. Elias sat on a bench wrapping his hands out of habit. Mina cleaned tools she didn't need to clean. Saratel perched on the top bunk, feathers relaxed for the first time. Mivran hovered near the doorway, eyes wide. So, this is how it ends. Juno shook her head. It doesn't end. It continues, just in a different direction. Vaughn Tal, the Dravik, leaned against a wall, arms crossed. Your species is irritating. Mina blinked. Thank you. Vaughn Tal's mouth curled slightly. You don't fight like warriors. You fight like architects. Juno glanced at Naira, who had entered quietly and now watched them like a commander watching a crew that had earned its trust. Naira said, architects build things that last. Saratel tilted her head. Why did the council send you? Naira's eyes narrowed just a fraction, as if remembering something far away. Because the coalition needs humans. But it also needs proof that humans can survive our worst habits without copying them. Elias asked, and can we? Naira looked at Juno. You already did. That night, the station's artificial sky dimmed into its sleep cycle. Juno walked alone along a viewing corridor where stars scattered like bright dust across the void. Meridian had tried to teach her that the galaxy was built on domination. But humans were from a world that had survived storms, famine, war, and silence. They were used to rebuilding. She pressed her palm to the cold glass and watched a supply vessel drift past, engines glowing like a small sunrise. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Olin. The senior instructor stood a careful distance away, as if proximity itself was a negotiation. I misjudged your species, Olin said, voice low. Juno didn't turn. Yes. Olin's jaw tensed. You could have destroyed Meridian. Exposed it to the council, to the public feeds. Why didn't you? Juno finally faced him. Because we didn't come here to burn the house down. Olin's eyes narrowed. Then why come? Juno's gaze was steady. To stop living in houses built for bullies. A long silence. Then Olin spoke again, quieter. What will you do now? Juno looked past him, past the station walls, into the star field. She pictured human ships entering space with patched hulls and stubborn hope. She pictured aliens who had never been heard finally having allies. She pictured a future where strength meant protecting, not crushing. We'll keep showing up, she said. We'll keep learning. And when we see someone getting hurt in silence. Her voice hardened into calm steel. We'll walk in. In the months that followed, Meridian changed. Slowly. Painfully. But it changed. Because humans had brought something the galaxy didn't know how to control. A refusal to accept cruelty as normal. A curiosity sharp enough to dissect any system. And a resilience that didn't just survive. It transformed.